The tragic story of Braniff International Airways, Flight 250, 1966. What went wrong? Introduction. On the night of August 6, 1966, Braniff International Airways Flight 250 took off on what was supposed to be a routine journey, but it would end as one of the most catastrophic air disasters in American history. The flight, carrying 42 passengers and 5 crew members, was bound from Kansas City, Missouri, to Omaha, Nebraska. What began as a calm journey through the summer night skies quickly descended into tragedy, leaving behind haunting questions and a mystery that would take years to unravel. Flight 250 would not only claim 47 innocent lives, but also expose critical flaws in aviation safety and weather forecasting, forever changing how flights operate in turbulent weather. Flight details. A BAC One-Eleven 203AE, a British-made twin-engine jet airliner, operated Braniff International Airways Flight 250. The aircraft was considered modern for its time, with a good safety record. The flight departed Kansas City at 10:55 p.m., with an estimated flight time of 40 minutes to Omaha. The captain in command was Don Pauly, an experienced pilot with over 17,000 flight hours, and First Officer James Hilliker, who had logged more than 3,800 hours. Both men were highly qualified, making what would happen next all the more shocking. The hidden danger. Unknown to the passengers and crew, the skies along the flight path were becoming increasingly hostile. A powerful line of thunderstorms had formed across the Midwest, producing violent winds, lightning, and heavy turbulence. However, weather radar technology in 1966 was still in its early stages, making it difficult for pilots to fully assess the severity of the storm ahead. The air traffic controllers in Kansas City warned Flight 250 about isolated thunderstorms along the route. But they underestimated how dangerous the weather would become. The last radio transmission. At 11:06 p.m., Flight 250 made its final routine radio transmission to Kansas City Center, reporting that they were flying at 6,000 feet, well below the storm clouds. The pilots requested to descend to a lower altitude, likely hoping to avoid turbulence. Just moments later, ground witnesses near Falls City, Nebraska, saw something horrifying in the night sky, an explosion of fire and debris. The BAC One-Eleven had broken apart mid-air, scattering wreckage across farmland below. All 47 people on board were killed instantly. What happened? The Civil Aeronautics Board, CAB, investigation would reveal that Flight 250 had encountered extreme turbulence inside the thunderstorm, so powerful that the aircraft's structure could not withstand the forces. The plane's tail section was ripped off mid-air, causing the rest of the fuselage to plummet to pieces. The CAB concluded that the pilots likely flew into the storm believing it was safe, not realizing how violent the turbulence had become until it was too late. But there were troubling questions left unanswered. Why did air traffic control not issue stronger warnings about the storm? Did the pilots underestimate the severity of the weather? Could mechanical issues have contributed to the disaster? The human cost among the passengers were families, business travelers, and even a group of military personnel. Entire families were wiped out in the tragedy, leaving behind grief-stricken relatives and a community in mourning. One passenger, Glenn Holcomb, was traveling home to see his wife and newborn baby, a reunion that would never happen. Another passenger, Marvin Wall, was a decorated U.S. Air Force veteran heading home to his family. The crash devastated small towns across Nebraska and Kansas, where many of the victims lived. The investigation. The CAB's final report concluded that the plane's structure had failed due to severe turbulence. However, the investigation exposed several troubling issues. Weather forecasts were inaccurate and outdated. Pilots had no way of knowing the true danger of the storm. There were no clear guidelines for how airlines should handle flights through turbulent weather. The crash highlighted how vulnerable airliners were to extreme weather in the 1960s, and how little protection passengers had against the forces of nature. How weather technology failed Flight 250. A deadly oversight. In the mid-1960s, aviation technology was rapidly advancing, but one critical aspect still lagged: weather detection and forecasting systems. The crash of Braniff International Airways Flight 250 would expose just how vulnerable both pilots and passengers were to the unpredictable forces of nature. The disaster became a grim turning point that forced the aviation industry to rethink how it approached weather-related flight safety. Outdated weather forecasting systems. In 1966, commercial flights primarily relied on ground-based weather stations and air traffic controllers to receive weather updates. These reports were often based on surface-level observations and radar data from fixed locations. However, these systems had significant limitations. They couldn't provide real-time updates on rapidly changing weather conditions. The radar coverage was often incomplete, especially in remote areas like the Midwest. Storm activity at higher altitudes was frequently undetected by ground-based radar systems. On the night of the crash, weather reports warned of isolated thunderstorms along Flight 250's route. But the intensity of the storm cell in the area was severely underestimated. Lack of onboard radar. One of the most crucial factors that doomed Flight 250 was the absence of onboard weather radar systems. The BAC One-Eleven aircraft was not equipped with radar that could detect storms directly ahead. Instead, pilots had to rely on ground controllers to relay storm locations, a dangerous game of guesswork in the dark skies. If the aircraft had been fitted with onboard radar, the pilots would have been able to visually detect the severe storm cells and alter their course to avoid them. The lack of this vital technology left the flight crew flying blind into danger. Miscommunication between air traffic control and pilots. During the investigation, it was revealed that air traffic controllers had some information about the storm's intensity, but their warnings to the pilots were not urgent enough. The final transmission from Flight 250 indicated that the crew was aware of the turbulence, but believed they were flying below the worst of the storm at 6,000 feet. However, what the pilots didn't know was that the storm had intensified far beyond what the reports had indicated, and that the zone of severe turbulence extended much lower than expected. This lack of clear communication became a deadly oversight. Why did the system fail? The failure of weather technology during Flight 250's journey can be traced back to three key issues. Inadequate radar coverage. Ground-based radar systems simply couldn't provide comprehensive coverage of the storm's full intensity. Delayed information. By the time weather reports reached the pilots, the storm had likely already worsened. Lack of training for severe weather situations. In the 1960s, pilots received limited training on how to navigate through extreme turbulence or avoid storm cells entirely. A catalyst for change. The crash of Braniff. Flight 250 served as a wake-up call for the entire aviation industry. The disaster directly influenced the introduction of onboard weather radar systems in commercial aircraft, improved storm avoidance protocols for flight crews, mandatory severe weather training for pilots, enhanced real-time communication channels between air traffic controllers and pilots. By the early 1970s, the FAA required all commercial airliners to be equipped with Doppler weather radar systems, a technology that could detect not only storms but also wind shear and turbulence. Could this crash have been prevented? Many aviation experts believe that if Flight 250 had been equipped with onboard radar technology, the pilots would have had enough time to divert their course and avoid the storm altogether. The tragedy stands as a haunting example of how small gaps in technology can have catastrophic consequences. Conclusion. The failure of weather technology on Braniff Flight 250 was not simply a result of outdated equipment. It was a reflection of how unprepared the aviation industry was for the dangers of flying through severe weather. The tragedy exposed a critical vulnerability in commercial air travel, one that would eventually be corrected through hard lessons learned at the cost of 47 lives. Even today, the advancements in weather detection systems owe their existence to the silent legacy of Braniff Flight 250, a flight that never should have ended the way it did.